Well, good day, board. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for allowing me to present this to you. The chair asked me to write down my concerns about the issue that I want to bring before you. And I decided I can't, I'm a plumber, typing, I don't know, it could take forever. So I thought I would do this format. What I'd like to talk to you people about is the policy for presentation of new business at a congressional meeting. What I want to do, okay, what my objectives are, right out front, I want to get rid of it. I think it's a problem. I think it's an issue that we have to address. And should start off with maybe giving a little history as to how this happened. Where did it come from? Well, it's like this. 2005, a member came up to the microphone at the annual meeting and said, "Hey, about this budget that you're presenting and your proposal for what you're doing, you've always given us what we consider a balance, what I would call in business a balance sheet. How about give us a profit and loss for, where we are at the time and where we're going to, how we've ended the year or close to the year or whatever." And John Ortberg at the time said, he was the executive pastor at times. He says, "That's a great idea. We're going to do that." It was in 2005. In 2006, that same guy stood up and go, "Hey, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we do this to the when we add the profit and loss to this thing? Get a P&L going here. That's a great idea. We're going to look into that." Well, that went on from 2006 and 2007 and 2008 and 2009, and every time was the same thing. It's a great idea. We're going to have to do that. Well, 2011, first time that I could remember that actually somebody stood up to make a motion at an annual meeting. This guy came up and made a motion and said, "Hey, I move that the board is directed to do this." And there was kind of a pause and everything else. And they voted on it, and that's what happened. And guess what? That's what we're still using today, is that same format to get the P&L to where we're at the end of September or however it's done. But that's how that happened, okay? Now, in 2012, this is what's told to me, that we can't have that. We can't have this, people just making motions like that. So we're going to develop a policy. 2012, this policy came in. Now, you have to understand that in 2012, when this policy was introduced, it was not introduced to the congregation and say, "Let's vote on it. Let's figure out what to do. Let's have a policy to do this because of this." It was just policy that all of a sudden, on the date in November or whenever it was, this policy shows up along with the ballots and everything else. And I was kind of stunned at that. And I out in the foyer, I asked the chair at the time, Bill McNider, I said, "You can't do this. I mean, this is against Robert's rules. This is against the Constitution as we see it in the WACC Constitution. It's against, I made a list of stuff, and he said, Mike, this is what we're going to do. So it's the meeting started, and Bill started saying the format. And you have to understand now, in Robert's rules, if the chair says something, you can't wait. You can't say, okay, I'm going to wait until he finishes or he does. Once he states something like that, like he presented this new policy and said, this is what we're going to do, you have a small window that you can appeal that decision. And I walked up and appealed that decision. And thank goodness that at the time that Todd was the parliamentarian, because Todd knew stuff. He knew what was going on. And he said, yeah, I can do it. And I appealed that decision to have that policy put in. And I would have prevailed. But during the process, the current pastor at the time stepped in, and he dictated how he wanted to do it, or that may be a harsher term, but you didn't go against the pastor back then. And I knew, politically speaking, hey, I could press things, but I don't want to press things too much. So I didn't prevail. Barely I didn't prevail in that appeal. But I went away thinking, well, okay, I'm going to get involved in it. That was my turning point where I said, I'm going to get involved in this format. So I started making some waves in that year. And funny thing, then they said to themselves, we're going to have to keep so they said, how can we keep this guy quiet here? So I think they made the decision, well, why don't we ask him to be parliamentarian? Because if he's parliamentarian, how much waves can he make? Because he's got to be sitting down there. So that was the start of my parliamentarian position. Well, carrying on at that point, that was in 2013, and I started at that point to be parliamentarian. In 2014, excuse me just a second. 2014, I was going to introduce some stuff, and they said, Mike, why don't you get involved and help us rewrite this policy? And I did. And at the time I said, well, I'll write this, because I knew it wasn't going to get away. I knew they weren't going to eliminate it. This wasn't the time to do this. But you have to understand, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself or backwards or whatever, but the policy says that presentation of new business at a congregational business meeting. And it stated that the reason they're doing that is they're following the guidelines of the bylaws. Well, it wasn't following the guidelines of the bylaws, and I told them that and presented the evidence that I had for it, and they, yeah, you're right, Mike. Okay, how do we change that? Because we're not going to change the policy, but how are we going to reword this? And I said, well, you should reword it. Number one, you should get rid of it saying the presentation of new business. You should say presentation of new business motions. Remember that term, because that term has been kind of floating around and people have assumed things, but that's not what the policy says. The policy says presentation of new business. It was back in 2012, and it was back in 2014 when it was rewritten. I know, because I rewrote it, and that's how it is. okay? And the guidelines in 2014 says, okay, you can present a motion, but we have a time-sensitive thing here. We'll allow the time-sensitive if you can get a 2/3 vote and so forth. And I don't know how I thought of that at the time. I regret it because I should have just fought it at the time, but you know, it is what it is. So 2014, it's revised. They have new wording. 2016 comes by. 2016, I was asked to be on the bylaws committee to make the changes to the bylaws. And I said, all right, I can not only do the bylaws, but I can get rid of this policy. I can get rid of this thing. Because it doesn't, you know, it's so against what Robert's rules are and point of orders and things of that nature, but I'll get into that later. But I said, okay, I can do this. And we started off the meetings and Bill McNider, who was the chair way back when, he was part of the group, and the current chair, Enid, was part of that group, and I was. And I made mention of this. I said, hey, I'd like to do this, work on this policy. And by the way, I said, I'd like to see what this MOB, or the manual of procedures, okay, are that you keep referring to in the bylaws. Well, we should see them, because if they're in the bylaws and it's mentioned in the bylaws, then they're actually part of the bylaws. Okay. So I got the hodgepodge of bylaws from manual procedures at the time, and I looked through them and I said, hey, what about this? Oh, Mike, that's gone. That's the presentation of business and new meetings. That's gone. Doggone, I wish I would have remembered who said that in one of those meetings, because I just, was in one ear out the other, because I thought it's gone. Great, I don't have to bring it up. I can work on other things, because we had a lot of things that we had to work on at the time. Okay, so the years go by, and I'm assuming that policy's gone, because I was told it was gone. But here's the deal, kind of strange, because I've been parliamentarian since 2013, and you had Robert Whitcomb and Don Marla, and then Fred, and then Don, and all these people before the November meeting would say, okay, Mike, here's the agenda, go over it, what do you think? And I'd look at it and go, you don't have new business. They say, well, Mike, we don't have new business anymore. We don't have new business anymore. I said, yeah, you do. I said that policy has gone away. And then a couple weeks later, I'd get the new agenda, and they would have new business there. I thought, okay, they checked it and they found out. Little did I know that policy was still in effect. So now we come to, and I'm the parliamentarian, and picture this. Somebody could have actually said, when somebody walked up to the microphone in new business and said, hey, I'd like to acknowledge XYZ. Somebody could have said, point of order. We don't have any new business. And think about that. Well, I'll get into that later. But no, I'm going to tell you now. Think about that. That means that if you don't have any new business, how are you going to have any old business? And I know it hasn't come up because we're just not that big, but in my world, okay, if you have, say, a motion or an amendment to, say, the budget. Let's say we had a budget and it got debated back and forth, and there was an amendment, and somebody tabled it, or somebody postponed it, or somebody made something else to say, okay, we'll bring it up later. You bring it up in old business. It's not the next year or the next March or whenever. You bring it up in old business. Now, if you don't have an old business, you don't have a new business, or vice versa, or whatever. So it's something to think about. So in 2020, we had somewhat of an incident in the latter part of 2020, and there could have been, might have been, should have been, whatever, maybe a motion during the 2020 annual meeting. Okay. And in conversations with the chair and the hierarchy and the board, they said, well, Mike, we're not going to have any motions on that because no motions were presented before the 2 weeks. And we had, I looked, I said, what are you talking about? And they said, no, that policy is still in effect. That's why I'm here today, because I want to get rid of that policy, because it was just wrong. It's just wrong. Okay, so let's discuss why it's wrong. Let's get down to it. Okay. Why do we and others, even the United States Congress, why do we use Robert's rules? Why do we? We do it because that's the way to present an orderly meeting and be fair and fairness. It's designed in its structure to do that. Robert's Rules has pages and pages and pages about how to present new business and new motions to things, and how to have a motion and what to do with it. Okay? That's why Robert's Rules is in our bylaws and in our Constitution. Now, Constitution, our WACC Constitution, let me, in my world again, let me get back to it. In my world, we have a term, and that term is AHJ. AHJ means authority having jurisdiction. Okay? So, in that in mind, who is the AHJ for WACC? Think about that. Who's the AHJ for WACC? Is it Robert's Rules? No. Is it City of Whittier? No. LA County? No. State of California? No. The AHJ, oh, I forgot one. Is it you guys? No. You're not the authority having jurisdiction. The authority having jurisdiction is the congregation. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, bottom line is, in our Constitution, that's the starting point. That's the bedrock of how we operate, is the Constitution. Okay? Article 3, Item 2. Let me read it. The final authority shall be the congregation to whom the church board and the senior pastor are responsible. Well, that means you got the congregation here, they're the head of everything. You got the board, you got the pastor. You got to think about that, because that's what reality is. That's what reality is. So, what does that actually mean? Well, let's look at this. Let's look at the MOB, the Manual of Operational Procedure. The name is Manual of Operating Procedure for the board to operate. It's their policy to how they have to operate. We might have an argument over it, but and I'd love to share that argument with you. But basically, that's what we're talking about. It's the policy that the board uses to define its actions, and then how it defines the actions of the staff, the pastors under it. It is from the board down, not the board up. That's where the problem is. Anything that reflects anything that reflects above the board, meaning the congregation has to vote that, not the board. Notice how the entire manual of operating procedures affects everything from the board down, except one policy only, and that is this one. This is the only one that dictates to the congregation how they are going to act. It's backwards. It's wrong. It's just wrong. I got to find out where I am in my notes. So look at these scenarios, though. So, and I think I've repeated it, but how are you going to handle a meeting where somebody wants to say something and they're told they can't talk because they didn't, and the thing is, I don't want to get, it was brought to my attention before how we should rewrite this, Mike. We should modernize it or do something with it. Okay, I'm going to be opposed to that. I want to get rid of it, and because I can see problems with it. I can see people wanting to get involved. Listen, if you can't figure out how to handle a meeting and how to and you're afraid of what motions could, is that the congregation's fault, or is that your fault for not knowing how Robert's rules are and how to run a meeting and how to do stuff? I mean, you guys got to educate yourself on those things yourself so that you can, because that's what a chair, I tell chairs this, it's your job to help people too. If you have a guy that you can see out there, he doesn't know, he's afraid to speak in front of people. He doesn't know, he's scared spitless to how to stand up in front of people, to how to make his point known, but he's got a point. You got to help him through that. You got to say, what are you trying to say? How are you trying to say? Let me help you with it. That's what a chair should be doing during a meeting. Not saying, well, you're going to have to write it down first, and then we'll see if we can address it, and yada yada yada. That's anyway. That's kind of it in a nutshell. Seriously, I mean, I kind of went on tangents, and I apologize for that, but basically, I'm appealing to the board on its own to make the decision on this, to get rid of it, because it's I'm going to be like a dog with a bone on it. I mean, it just it bugs me that much, and I know every time you get something from me, you think, oh, there's Mike again, but this is important. I'm imploring, I'm begging, really think about this. And at the next board meeting, I plan on being there, and we can talk about it some more, and we can chat about it if you want. I don't, the reason I'm doing this now is so that you can see it and you can understand what I'm saying, and maybe understand the passion that I have involved with it, so that I don't waste your time, because I know your time is valuable. You guys are volunteers, and gosh, I respect, all the time you guys put into it. That's why I'm doing this now, so you can kind of look at it, then we can review it. And if you have any questions, we can certainly discuss it then. I'd be happy to discuss it more with you. Anyway, that's about it. Again, thank you for your time, and we'll see you at the next meeting.